Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please hit that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate a small amount given in the link in the description box. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs is a professor at Columbia University. He is an economist, a public policy analyst, and an important voice on geopolitics. Professor Sachs, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Great to be back together with you. Thank you.
It has been more than a month since the war started, and we hosted you at the beginning of the war. How do you describe what has happened since in the last month or so?
A lot of destruction, a lot of pain, and no meeting of the minds, obviously. This is a war of aggression by the US and Israel, and they show no inclination to stop their aggression. Uh, they thought that Iran would be on its back or dead or destroyed or under the US and Israeli thumb by today. That did not happen. And so we have a war of aggression that was launched on the rather flimsy and rather delusional premises that killing some leaders would put Iran under the thumb of Israel and the United States. And when that didn't happen, everything since then has been escalation and improvisation. And that's where we are today.
We are hearing news about this Trump ultimatum to Iran on the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. That deadline has been extended by a day. How do you read the ultimatum of raining hell on Iran if the blockade is not lifted?
Well, they've been raining hell on Iran for the last 4 weeks. So the idea that now we're going to get serious is not really serious. Trump is a nut, and he rains hell on everybody day by day. Um, I don't take lightly what he says, but I also don't think that it's been kid gloves up until now. Israel and the United States have been murdering, killing, bombing uh, throughout Iran for the last 4 weeks. I think it's likely they will continue to do so. I think it's likely that Iran will continue to have retaliatory capacity and will continue to do grave damage in Israel and in the Gulf countries. So I see this war continuing. I don't think Trump's ultimatum means very much.
There are reports about what some White House officials are calling dual track approach, which are Trump escalating on one hand, but also mediators, not just countries like Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, but also officials within his administration, including J.D. Vance, Kushner, Witkoff, discussing about end of this war. Is that all bluff? Does it make any sense? And what does it mean?
It's not exactly bluff, but it's also not exactly likely to succeed. Kushner and Witkoff, okay, it says almost everything. Two arch Zionists whose track record is zero. Um, if they're still part of this negotiating team, it almost surely means that there's no real negotiation there. So I don't see this as serious. Also, Trump has one mode of negotiating, which is I smash you in the face, I hit you over the head, I wound you, I threaten you with your murder, and then I say, now you agree with me. Uh, and if you don't, I kill you. That's just about the only game in his repertoire. He does this repeatedly. It worked once in a while with, say, union workers putting in plumbing in his buildings. He would stiff them when he was a real estate developer. I think we're finding it doesn't really work on the international scene. It doesn't end wars. It doesn't make treaties. It doesn't do anything that Trump thinks it does. I regard him as a simpleton. And with one demonstrative mode, which is I threaten to kill you and then make a demand on you and you agree. I don't think the Iranians, from what I can see, are likely to fall into line.
Iranian officials have said that they are not negotiating directly, but they have also responded to different proposal coming from different parts of the world. And as we are doing this, there are bits and pieces of those reports coming out in the media. We don't have everything about it, but they are talking about permanent end of the war. Now, Western media, as they did in Ukraine, are talking about ceasefire, and people like you and many others about the NATO-Russia conflict had to explain it over and over again that ceasefire and a permanent end to the conflict was not the same in Ukraine. That involved basically reversing the lack of neutrality that Ukraine had, and also demilitarization of Ukraine, so that it was not a threat to Russia. If you could tell us a little bit about your sense of what Iran might mean about the permanent end to the conflict rather than a mere ceasefire, as mainstream media has been talking about.
Yeah, it's a very basic point. The difference of a ceasefire and a permanent end to the conflict is the permanent end to the conflict requires you to look at causes of the conflict and then for the United States and Israel to actually make some concessions. Whereas a ceasefire, the idea is the shooting stops and Donald Trump announces a great victory. And nothing has really changed regarding the ability to go in and kill Iranians when they want, murder them when they want, attack their bases when they want, and with the no cost Israel, which acts with impunity all over the Middle East. So there's a big difference between a ceasefire and a real peace. To my mind, a real peace starts with the fact that the United States and Israel keep attacking Iran. Well, how's that going to stop? Uh, Having the United States say, well, we have a ceasefire is not very credible. Even a treaty with the United States is pretty pathetic. This is not a country that honors its treaties. So the only real way is to say these military bases that surround Iran uh, are no longer U.S. military bases with the freedom to act. It would require the Gulf states to say, yes, we have sovereignty and these bases cannot be used for attacks against Iran. This would be a starting point. This is what Iran has said. Why are we surrounded by U.S. military bases? Uh, I think that a permanent peace requires a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel. Without that, there's no peace. Israel just pursues its greater Israel agenda. It invades Lebanon, it attacks and invades Syria. It acts with impunity. By the way, there's no safety for Iran with Israel acting with impunity, backed by the United States. So the United States would have to say something about Israel. Oh, they never will. Not in these, I mean, maybe they will sometime, but they're not going to today. And that, to my mind, means that the U.S. is not serious. Of course, it's not serious. The U.S. wants all its prerogatives to go in and kick the shit out of Iran anytime it wants to. That's what a ceasefire means. What Iran is looking for, perhaps too nicely, by the way, but what they're looking for is how do we know that this is not just another occasion for a few months and then having all of our leadership decapitated again, especially when that's the declared intention of the U.S. and Israel. So I think it's an impasse, uh, and it's possible that Iran concedes or capitulates. I doubt it. Uh, but one thing's for sure, the United States and Israel have not made one iota of a concession to Iran's security to this moment. I don't think they will.
Let alone what you are saying, which is the permanent end of the U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf
Of
and the
course.
other places, and also end of the occupation in Palestine. I mean, that's what your
These are the
basic.
basics for real peace in the Middle East, as I've been saying for I don't know how many decades. Uh, this is, if you really want peace in the Middle East, uh, Israel, which is a rogue nation, needs to be stopped from being a rogue nation. This is the most basic point. The United States, which partners with Israel on all of this rogue behavior, it needs to stop. The military bases of the United States need to stop in Eastern Europe, in the Gulf region. They're just a magnet for war.
And can the military bases in the Gulf countries in particular end without a significant transformation of the government structure in those countries, given the history of dependency on U.S. security at the very least? But we can also think about investment patterns, the whole history of petrodollars, et cetera, et cetera. That also raises question about the continuation of dollar itself, given if these countries stop buying American weapons and they don't plug back those surplus in U.S. assets, that would destabilize the dollar at a time when the bond yields have gone up.
I'm inclined to think we could have peace. Uh, we could have even the U.S. surviving without a few military bases in the Gulf. Uh, I don't believe that these are existential issues for the U.S. or for the U.S. dollar. Uh, the share of oil in global trade is a few percent. It's actually not such a big deal. It's rather manageable. It's not the source of the U.S. Economic position, actually. Um, Maybe some people believe it is, so they're ready to fight for it, but it's not. The U.S. will do just fine without military bases in the Gulf. And even if some significant part of the oil proceeds are denominated in yuan or rupees or renminbi, it's not really going to have much consequential effect on the U.S. economy. And if I were advising the U.S. government, I'd say, calm down. You don't need these bases. Iran's not going to invade the Gulf. Uh, the Soviet Union, which doesn't exist, is not going to invade the Gulf. There are no reasons for these military bases other than U.S. hegemony, which is something completely unworthy. Why are these bases really there? To protect against whom? No reason. So I think and by the way, Trump himself has said, I give him credit, even though I think he's a lunatic. He said a couple of days ago, we don't have enough money for war and health care. And so he said, we're just going to have to do without health care. Uh, well, the man's a loon, but still, he's right. We don't have enough for both. So close the bases, for God's sake. Americans want health care.
And what do you make of the argument that the U.S. incentive for attacking Iran? I'm not talking about the Israeli incentive, but the
Yeah,
one of the U.S. incentives of attacking Iran is China. The argument is that that would disrupt Chinese trade in oil. That would also extinguish future prospect of upgrading, undergrading the yuan BRICS currency.
I think there's truth in that proposition in the sense that that's how some Americans view this. Some American leaders think if we control the Gulf on both sides, Iran and the Arab countries, then we are in a much stronger position vis-a-vis China. I think that that is part of the calculus that somebody has told Trump. Again, I think it's not only unworthy and unlikely to succeed, but not much of an economic analysis. America is not uh, winning the contest with China over its purported control over the Gulf. Actually, just today, President Xi said we will accelerate our transition to energy security through renewables and nuclear at home. It will reduce further our dependence on the external oil. And that fact, which is going to happen, plus the fact that the United States can't really run the world energy markets despite its pretensions to do so, mean that having a war for this purpose is not a good calculation. But I will agree with you, it is part of the calculus of the American policymakers. I just think that it's not a good calculus.
On the impact of the war, some analysts are saying that this war might accelerate the buying of or the hunt for Chinese technology for green energy transition, particularly in the global south, and that may create diffusion of technology as we have seen in the whole history of science and technology. How optimistic are you about this impact?
I think that in general, it's true that this war will accelerate the transformation of the world's energy system in the emerging economies, especially to wind, solar, hydro, uh, and nuclear. Uh, they will make the calculation that this is uh, betting on the Gulf is not a good bet. We should be making that transformation just for ecological and efficiency reasons alone. But because of the vested interests of the coal, oil, and gas lobbies, that transformation has been slowed. When it happens, and it is happening, but when it happens even faster, China will be at the center of that transformation. I hope India will become a major uh, supplier as well. But the United States and Europe will not be there because both the US and Europe basically have been betting on a continuation of the fossil fuel world, the US especially because it's a major fossil fuel producer. And Trump, even more than that, because he's an ignoramus on top of everything else. And so he's been betting on drill, baby, drill. And what this war will do is definitely accelerate the transformation to Chinese led green or zero carbon energy.
There have been a lot of talks in the emerging markets as well as in other countries in the north about self-reliance, given this war has come as a series of events like the global tariff war by the Trump administration, the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. And probably a lurking war on Cuba as sanctions have become harsher and harsher, and it's just now effectively they are in a blockade. So in countries after countries, we are seeing discussions about self-reliance. Of course, one aspect of that is building military sovereignty, but the other aspect is about economic self-reliance. And we hosted Pravat Patnaik and John Bellamy Foster, the editor of Monthly Review, and I asked them this question about self-reliance. And their argument from a Marxist perspective is that the whole project of hyperglobalization, whether in trade or investment, has run out of course, and countries might now rethink about unfettered globalization and unfettered openness because of the vulnerabilities it brings along. I'm very, very curious about your response and what is your intervention in these discussions about self-reliance, particularly for countries from the global south.
Well, I don't believe in that exactly that way. Who is the greatest beneficiary of globalization has been China. China went from poverty to very high prosperity on the basis of an outward-oriented economy. And it did that a lot through exports to the US and to Europe. Then, as China became more successful, the US went to slam the door on its own market, and Europe has half closed the door, I would say, not because the economics are wrong, but because of geopolitics, that the U.S. would rather punish itself and hurt its own economy than to see China get a special benefit from this. But globalization on the whole is beneficial for emerging economies. It accelerates growth if it's done properly and well, like China has done, or Singapore has done, or many countries in the ASEAN region have done. And I think, as India, broadly speaking, is doing right now and has been doing for the last 20 or 25 years, very hard to develop autarkically. India had the Permit Raj regime for a long time. It did not lead to uh, development that was very effective. I believe in opening up. The one that's closing right now is the United States. And why is it closing? It's closing actually because globalization is effective. It's so effective that it's weakening America's relative position. Not its absolute position, by the way, its relative position. The United States continued to benefit from trade with China, but China benefited faster, more. It had more catching up to do. That's, to me, a success. So I'm not exactly of this view that globalization has been a punishment. What I am in agreement with is that neo-colonial economic relations are a punishment. Uh, Europe and the US stealing Africa's natural resources is a punishment, but not trade and investment. I'd like to see the BRICS be the foundation of the emerging economies, which are about 80 to 85% of the world population, and probably around 60% of the world GDP, keep an open system. I think it's mutually beneficial. It speeds technology transfer. It enables financial transfers that can help capital scarce regions to catch up faster. And I think the anti-globalists, so-called, or globalization, should reflect on the fact that the ones that are the most protectionist right now are the old incumbent powers. And they are seeing, in a way, rightly, that an open system means that Europe and the United States lose its special perch in history. That's true. But to my mind, that's fine. That's the point. That makes a multipolar world. So this is how I see it. I would like China and India actually to be on good trade relations with each other. I would like the BRICS to have an open trading system with investment flows and trade within the region. I would like Africa to form good partnerships with India, China, Russia, Brazil, and others, because I think it will speed Africa's economic development as well.
Yeah, the anti-globalist might not disagree with you about the protectionism in and the imperial core because throughout the history of colonialism, there have been very arbitrary restrictions to protect domestic industries in the
Exactly.
imperial.
Yes. So the whole point is, in my view, the period of high imperialism, which is roughly 1800 to 1950. For India, you could say 1750 to 1950, roughly speaking, absolutely broke the dependent economies or the colonial economies, no question. This was a great age of divergence. But real globalization, and actually even the very imperfect kind we had after World War II, broadly speaking, enabled a narrowing of the gap, broadly a period of economic convergence. Not uniformly, not fairly, and all the rest, but if things had remained closed, it would have been adverse for China, for India, for other major uh, members of the BRICS, for example, than in fact is the case. And if the system were to be open and reciprocally fair right now, it would be a big benefit for the emerging economies, not a hindrance, a benefit. And so that's the sense in which I would like to see globalization stay, because I'm in favor of a multipolar world. I'm in favor of Europe and the United States losing their special perch, not because they're going into absolute tailspin, but because the rest are developing faster, uh, ending the gaps that were created during the imperial age.
Um, I just wanted to quickly ask you about um, yeah, your idea about investments in the age of globalization, because it is trade that we often talk about. And my own research reveals that, for instance, in China, investment restrictions have been very high, particularly within capital markets. And during the early years in the 90s and early 2000s, there were all kinds of restrictions. And what China was able to do was to basically bring in long-term investments while restricting short-term capital flows. Now, why was China able to do that and not other countries is a longer discussion. But I just wanted to ask you about, when we talk about openness in a very general sense, do we recognize the danger of short-term capital dependency on short-term capital flows that countries tend to do, global south countries I'm talking about, just for balance of payments, whether it's reliance on stock markets or Eurobond market, and they have wreaked havoc in many countries in Africa.
Yeah, so openness means a lot of things. It means trade in goods and services. It means technology transfers. It means foreign investment. It means long-term capital movements, and it like long-term loans. And it means open. It can mean openness to short-term transactions, interbank deposits, short-term borrowing from international markets, and so forth. So, uh, what is very basically true, is that financial markets are prone to crises, and especially short-term capital is prone to panics and sudden reversals and sudden stops of flows. And there's a vast history and literature on bank panics and capital market panics and balance of payments crises and so forth. These are almost all a reflection of short-term liquidity considerations, that suddenly uh, a government is no longer able to roll over its credit, or suddenly there's a run on the banks of a country. And what history has shown is that in a domestic economic context, these crises need to be uh, prevented and managed by having the central bank or other institutions be a kind of lender of last resort, or having deposit insurance or other kinds of institutions that either prevent the panics or respond to them quickly. At the international level, we don't have that right now. The only lender of last resort in the international system is the US Federal Reserve, because of the dollar basis of the international system. But the Fed doesn't act as a lender of last resort, except for countries favored in U.S. foreign policy. In fact, it acts as an instigator of crisis in countries opposed by U.S. foreign policy. It makes crises. It generated the Iran crisis in 2025. Even our Treasury Secretary explained all of that. So this is why short-term capital flows are so dangerous for countries. There is no lender of last resort. You're just opening yourself up to instability. And that means that you need capital market regulation, you need a lot of prudence, and you need mechanisms where there is some lender of last resort. I'd like the BRICS to create something akin to that that is outside of the US dollar system, at least generous swap lines across the major central banks of the BRICS, the rupee, the Reserve Bank of India, the Russian Central Bank, the People's Bank of China, and so forth, because there needs to be that kind of prevention of crises. Just opening up the door to capital movements is a no-go. I just realized I have to go. I have a call right now.
We'll leave it there, Professor
Very
Sachs.
good.
Thank you so much for your time. Take care.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.